This is Dr. Don Lynch, and I'm here with a spiritual son. This is Kirk Blackwell, pastor, prophet, and a man of God who has a lot to say in this generation from a kingdom point of view. And he and I have been walking together and enjoyed a fathering and spiritual son relationship for some years.
I just hit a decade.
Wow, has it really been 10 years? Hard to believe.
Yeah.
And you don't look old enough. You started when you were, even through his courtship and marriage of a beautiful wife. And he's a part of our company of prophets here and preaches here often and is, whether he knows it or not, working on his first book. And
Is this true?
this is true. And well, introduce yourself, Kirk.
Yeah, so it has been a decade, which that was a huge turning point. What do I want to say about myself? I would really say that, having a heart for fathering and being a product and realizing what fathering has produced in my life has been something that's really changed my heart towards how important fathering is to the kingdom of God. Understanding how those dynamics work, how discipleship works, how God has a system in place to get me what I need to discover, to fulfill, to complete, become the person that's ready to fulfill the call of God on my life. Yeah. And so walking that process for 10 years now and what that has produced has been something that is completely invaluable.
Wow. Well, we're here because we have had some discussion, and I wanted to share with you perspectives of spiritual fathering as it relates to racism, an obvious reality. And this is on the heels of a horrendous, a truly inhuman and terrible murder that we have all seen played out before our eyes numerous times, if we just had the stomach actually to continue to watch
Right.
George Floyd being killed and his life literally crushed out of him. So horrendous. And this, of course, has sparked something that's now been, in my opinion, I think the initial cry for justice has been overwhelmed and overtaken, even hijacked. So, and turned into something else. That was already there, and I think in preparation for this moment. But I'm more interested in the kingdom of God, in oneness, how we breach the racial gap, or bring a racial reconciliation in the sense that we're not destroying racism. I never have a problem saying you're a black man.
Right.
That would be kind of silly to say you're not.
Right.
And nobody's accused me of being a black man because they've seen me try to dance. So maybe that's a poor joke. I don't know. I just
Everything's on edge now.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that may be misinterpreted. But I can't jump either. That was a great movie. But it seems like the arts and media get to interpret things for us sometimes, and then force a worldview even upon us, which is completely unbiblical. And so what we've been discussing is, what does the Bible say? How does the kingdom work? And why is it that that we flourished? I have flourished from what I have received from you as a spiritual son, and the true honor, the true learning, submission at greater levels of trust, because that's what it's about.
Right. Not
being controlled, but not being a uniformity that caused conformity, but rather of discovering who you are.
Yeah.
Not limiting that to what modern American black culture would say are the parameters,
Right.
but rather expanding you in a kingdom culture that doesn't limit either of us by race. Because all cultures have negativity, and all cultures
Correct.
have something redeemable.
Right.
And so God's not destroying culture, but redeeming it in such a way that we work together in a seamless way. And by that I mean that we don't have conflict in terms of attempting to. I believe, and I could be completely blind, and you can say so right now, but I don't attempt to force any culture upon you except to mention to you, teach you, train you what kingdom culture should look like.
Right.
And that's what I want to see. How do you feel about that?
No, I completely agree with that. I would say that we have different races, different cultures. This is intentional. This is by design. This was
Yeah.
in the heart of God.
Yes.
As different expressions, I would even go so far to say that there are different expressions of the kingdom in different cultures,
Absolutely.
in different races. And those things do need to be restored. They do need to be refined, but it's through the lens and the understanding of the kingdom. So if we're starting with black culture, we're starting with white culture, Hispanic culture, any other culture as a
Yeah.
starting point, then we've already missed it, because we have to start with the kingdom understanding and the king's understanding of why he wanted cultures.
Exactly.
So that has to be I think the starting place for the conversation.
So would you say that your wife came from a different culture than you?
Yeah, absolutely.
My wife and I would say, came from the same culture, but there's never been a moment in my entire ministry, 50 years, when I did not believe in interracial marriage. So I just want to say
Right.
that I don't see that interracial marriage destroys cultures. I think it redeems cultures, and I think that's being even more emphatically impressed upon my thinking, traveling in more than 30 nations and seeing the kingdom of God in blended ways. Now, to the present situation, I don't see how any human being isn't horrified by what happened
Exactly.
to George Floyd
Right.
on a human level. When you saw that, and I don't know if you've seen the entire Could Stomach watching the whole thing, how did you feel?
Yeah, I watched it just one time because just what that does, to a person is interesting.
Yeah.
But I think the first thing that I felt was, and that a lot of people are feeling, was just a high level of confusion. It's like, how do we wind up at this situation? How does this end up happening? When that was, for me personally, what caused me to have the greatest difficulty to get any resolve and really wrap my head around the situation is, why would someone put their knee in someone else's neck? It wasn't even about the race thing, but why would you put your knee in someone else's neck for more than 8 minutes? That just didn't make any sense to me.
That's right.
And the reality is it doesn't make sense because it's evil.
That's right.
So that's really, the act was a heinous act, but that is what it is. There is present day evil. And I think it was a realization of, wow, this is how evil men can be.
That's right.
So, of course, anger, frustration, I understand the outrage. Not that I think that it's helpful, the rioting or the looting, but I understand it, why people would respond in that kind of way. So, it's a lot, and it's still an ongoing process of still understanding
Yes.
how it did impact me.
Yeah, I agree with
traumatic.
you. Absolutely.
It is traumatic.
And I looked at the officer's face and his eyes, which are key. Being spiritual people, we look at eyes. His hands in his pocket, his whole posture, and the way in which he looked at people who he obviously knew were filming
Right.
him committing this action. And he almost looked as if he was in a demonic stupor. I mean, I'm not trying to super spiritualize this, nor am I trying to just blame the devil. I'm saying that there was something in this man that he brought to the situation. The situation itself wasn't it, and it wasn't all about racism. But that doesn't diminish the fact that we have racism, or that race may have had some input into the way in which he treated George Floyd. There's no
Right.
doubt about that. We now know that they knew one another and had some history. So I don't think we need to separate race from it or act as if we don't have race problems in our nation, because we know we do. We don't need to do that, but we need to start with the image of God in man. If we want to build a kingdom understanding, the same God who created me created you,
Right.
and humanity is not less in me or less in you. The image of God not less in me or less in you.
Right.
But I believe the image of God is not complete until you see both male and female in kingdom covenant marriage. Therefore, as you married your beautiful wife and you came into oneness because God joined you together, two kind of different cultures, and came together in oneness of spirit and soul,
Yeah.
because you're best buds, and the oneness of spirit, soul, and body doesn't diminish race in you or her or anyone else. And so I think the race problem, which is something we need to face, and I'm being accused of being silent about it, but I'm not. I haven't been silent about it for the 50 years of my ministry.
Right.
People who know me say I have never been silent, even to the point of saying that I believe the interracial marriage according to the scriptures, was not forbidden. Believe me, that cost me a lot of friendships. And people said I wasn't biblical, but you still can't pick up a Bible and prove me wrong.
If we could just get back to that, to the
Yeah,
Bible.
yeah, because we're talking about the image of God. We're talking about humanity created by God. Therefore, we get to inalienable rights, and then we understand, I understand our history as a nation differently, because I believe God was moving us by mercy and his power through the history of this nation, even in the Civil War, through the Civil War, into this very moment of history. He was moving the United States of America toward greater liberty, and the recognition of inalienable rights means that you and I are equally valuable before God, and that our heritages come to this land and nation in order to produce something for the kingdom that will be global in its impact.
Exactly. Yeah.
But did you saw what happened, and you have, I know, have history with racism. You grew up with it. You're not a stranger to it, right?
No.
Your experiences with it you brought to the moment when you watched George Floyd. Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about the response? I mean, you said a moment ago you understood the rage or the protests. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but what you said a moment ago was you understood. Outrage. Yeah. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I would say that it's a good question. Yeah, I would say that with the personal experiences that I've had, I'm going to speak at it from a different perspective because of a fathering lens in my life.
Yeah, okay.
So my tendency is going to be to look at this from a spiritual or biblical standpoint and then to come to a conclusion from there.
Yes.
And that even requires putting personal experiences aside to be able to get God's perspective on the situation, which isn't easy. And I think that's one thing that I would say that there's one thing that I think that we could do for, for the black community, for black people, is for us to come to this understanding that a lot of us are secretly in our heart, which this is something that surfaced in me. That's why I'm talking about it. You have this why God moment in the same way that I would imagine that the children of Israel, 400 years in slavery, you come out delivered and into another 70 years of Babylonian captivity, of this question of just like, why is this still happening, and how much can I really trust God if this is still happening? And the reason why I bring that up is because it's real. That was a real feeling. That was a real emotion that I had.
Wow.
Been submitted, been in a fathering dynamic relationship, but understanding, okay, God, you're allowing this to happen. What does this represent to a people, to a community? And how do I then process all of that information?
Yes, sir. Wow.
And it's going through the throes of, I understand the outrage. I get why people, would come to a place where they say the only solution is to riot and burn things down. And I've had friends, I've had people, we need to blow up the Constitution, completely start all over again. And everything in between from that and, peaceful protests. And so coming to a resolve internally was really the journey that I've been on. And I wouldn't say that I've experienced a ton of, overt racism, but there have been some moments that did mark my life when I was young. Yeah. Immediately a sense of fear.
Yeah. And
feeling that, work to grip me even now, being out and about, and it's what could this situation look like, or what could this situation turn into? I mean, you had that looming, and I think that's the right word for it, this looming voice and presence of fear of you're being targeted, you know what I mean? I'm going to, exactly what the Bible says, steal, kill, destroy.
Yeah.
And so I think that's still something that I'm walking through, and that's a huge aspect of everything is I feel like I have no control, no matter how good I am or what I do or how I present myself over the perception.
No control.
Over that, which is a fearful.
Yeah.
That's a horrible place to be.
Yeah, in other words, your fear says, if I had control, then I wouldn't have the fear.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, if people cut themselves, people that, they actually cut themselves, cutters, and we deal with them, a freedom ministry, deal with them, we minister to them, we love them. And people say, why would somebody do that? Why would you cut yourself, in other words? Well, it's because the pain you're experiencing is so severe that this is pain you feel like you can control.
Right.
I'm in control of this pain, I'm not in control of that pain.
Right.
So fear brings you to a point of seeking control, and then however you interpret what control looks like, what's going to make you feel safe again, or that you have the control to deal with threat, that drives your motivations. And so I mean, right now I'm super touched. I want you to understand, as your spiritual father, hearing you talk about fear, because as a spiritual father, I'm angry.
Yeah.
I want to get some control too. I mean, I'm like, I don't want Kirk to have fear. I don't want a society that produces that condition.
Right.
I don't want there to be that situation. Now, I can't fix it.
Yeah, I know.
So
Yeah.
for me, I'm frustrated. I'm like, I would like to magic wand this thing and there not be that problem anymore. But I can't do that. Your mom and dad couldn't do that.
Right.
Police can't do that, and no government in the world's been able to do that.
No.
So how do we, as individuals, as kingdom leaders and kingdom people growing up with this reality, what do we do about that? I have fears about different things. I don't have a fear that comes from that point of view, but I have experienced, I don't know if you call it racism, because racism is defined very differently by different people.
Completely differently, yeah.
But I've been in 30 nations, and I know how it is to be gringo, Americano. I've been in places where being from America was a big problem for people. I've had people stand up while I was preaching and say, "Who do you think you are to come here and preach to us like this?" I was like, "I'm preaching the gospel.
Right.
I'm representing Jesus. I'm not representing an Americanization. I'm not here to, I'm not here with a super kind of elitism that I'm better than you. I'm not preaching from that perspective, but that's what was coming up in their spirit. To me, that's a form of racism, but it's not the same history that we've had here in terms of racism, but there is a different history in different places. So I don't say that to diminish or deny racism or try to redefine it, but I do believe there are other voices in the world that can contribute to the discussion of racism besides Black Americans.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I don't do that in any way to diminish, but rather to expand the dialogue to help everyone come to a place where reconciliation is greater, is deeper. But I'm angry, and I don't know if people understand that I'm angry about what happened to George Floyd, probably from a different perspective, perhaps, than you, or maybe the same, I don't know. But to me, that level of injustice is that's not human.
Right. It was inhumane. Yeah.
I feel the heart of God, and God is angry.
Yeah. And he wants justice.
Yeah.
I mean, you read throughout the Bible, and the story is really about justice.
Right.
That is a huge aspect, I would say, of the story, is that he's doing what he can, and that included him sending his only son
That's right.
in order for justice to be established. And
right.
so I think that us coming into agreement with God's heart on the matter is so important. And the reality is I don't believe, we were kind of talking about solutions, I don't believe that this is going to be a solution that's going to come through flesh and blood.
Yes, I agree with you, 100%.
It's going to be a solution because we can't sustain it. Flesh and blood can't sustain this. Let's say that we fix this, we won't, in 50 years, it'll be something different, and that's, again, not to diminish, the act or racism or anything like that. And if there's anything that I can do to stop it, again, we would want to stop it.
That's right.
But I think it's coming to a place of understanding the very thing that fear would want me to do is, how can I take control of this situation in order to prevent something from happening? But if you look at it even through a biblical perspective, and this was something the Lord had shown me, is that a lot of times even people that are oppressed, when they get in a position of power, they wind up oppressing others.
Yeah.
And that's also what I don't want. I don't want this to turn into a thing of, okay, we the Black people now have the power, Black Power movement, and now we're enslaving and we're oppressing, because that doesn't,
Now we're in control.
Right. Now we're in control. So now we're going to.
Now we want you to feel
back.
fear. Yeah.
Exactly.
Time for you to feel fear. And I know that that's an aspect of what's hijacked this situation. To me, that's totally separate issue that we would talk about, looting, rioting instead of protest, peaceable protest. I would and have completely supported that as a constitutional right, because it's an inalienable right we receive from God for peaceable protest. 1,000% behind that, 100%. And I'm not quite about the issue. Rioting, that's, some of it that's called rioting, we have to talk about, is that rioting or is that still peaceful protest? In other words, how do you protest? Because Martin Luther King did protests in a way that were different than had occurred in the past. So people said that he was breaking the law, and he wasn't. What he was doing was peaceable, and it was right, it was just, and it was very, very effective. Where does peace peaceful protest cross over into rioting is a discussion. That's what I'm trying to say. Looting, no doubt. That's something else. Destruction of property, this is counterproductive to what we're attempting to accomplish here.
Exactly.
And that's not a discussion of racism. That's something else that's happening. That's lawlessness, globalism, collectivism, socialism, Marxism. That's not even a part of our discussion here. It's not even about racism. Those are people utilizing this moment, hijacking justice in order to produce injustice.
I do think one of the things to point out is I did have to go back and look at, I looked at Martin Luther King and wanted to get God's perspective on that situation through prayer and intercession and things like that.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is interesting is how effective peaceful protest was during that time, even in the midst of there still being damage that was done. I mean, people were still hosed down, had dogs sitting on them, thrown in jail, but still the level of effectiveness was still there. And so looking at that as I would say model, for lack of a better term, of what can we do now and what's the right steps to take right now is important. But through a kingdom understanding, we talk about racial reconciliation. A lot of people have been throwing that phrase around, and what does that mean? And I really do believe biblically, I don't think that it's our responsibility to achieve racial reconciliation. I think that Jesus Christ has already done it on the cross.
All right.
According to Ephesians 2.
Okay, we're not producing it.
We're not producing it.
Exactly, but we are implementing it.
We are implementing it.
All right.
Exactly.
I agree with you 100%.
And I think that has to be a place that we, again, starting points, perspectives to understand how we move forward from here.
Exactly.
Because that's what all the questions, that's what all the frustration is about, is how do we move forward from here.
Excellent. I heard at a conference, I was in Atlanta, and a lot of turmoil in the city, and we were praying. I was holding hands with people in prayer, apostles and leaders of the kingdom. And I heard Tim Sheets reading from a letter written by Dr. Martin Luther King while he was in prison. Yeah. And in the letter, in the middle of the letter, he said, what we're lacking is a true ecclesia. And I thought, what a prophetic voice he had. And here, you and I, of course, we are talking ecclesia because we're saying that church as we have known it, and this is what he was saying, church as we know it, in that moment of history, he said, church as we know it fails. This is not the solution.
Right.
Yeah. And he started talking about kingdom in the same way that I talk about kingdom, when you and I talk about ecclesia. The word Jesus used was a kingdom word. And he was really saying in his generation, in a very powerful and prophetic way, what I'm writing about, what we're preaching and talking about, is that this is a kingdom issue that needs spiritual, heavenly legislation. Right. Jesus has already solved the problem in terms of making a provision. Correct. Grace is here, mercy is here, all the spiritual aspects of things which are much more powerful than anything we can produce in the natural. Correct. With flesh and blood. Exactly. These are all available. Now, how do we implement it? And he was saying, in his generation, church as I know it failed. It's not going to produce the change we need. I was like, and I had known this, not the first time I've been aware of this truth, but it hit me with such a powerful way in the circumstances that were playing out right around us in Atlanta and other cities of the United States and around the world. Right. Because as we've said, when we entered into January 1st, these were global issues. The virus was global, the economic impact was global, and now this has happened is definitely a global situation. Yeah. So we're in a moment of history unlike any other. Sadly, we don't have Dr. Martin Luther King with us, but we do have the legacy, the information. We have his dream, which I listened to, I read again, I read this letter. And I thought, a man before his time, but his word is still alive because it's a kingdom word. Exactly. And Tony Evans and other leaders are talking kingdom as quite frankly, when I teach kingdom, I point to books that are written by black leaders. You know that I do. Yeah. And I say, these men gave us an understanding of kingdom that we need. And to me, this is a totally different episode that we could probably sit down and talk about, but a lot. You could say we learned about kingdom from England, or you could say we learned about kingdom from Africa. You could say, well, we learned about kingdom from Europe. We did, but we learned a lot about kingdom in terms of spiritual heritage. I wish people would listen carefully to those words. Spiritual heritage came to this land, and to Brazil and South American lands came from Africa, because there's an understanding of kingdom there,
Right.
which is even more valid. It's more valid than what we learned from Europe.
Yeah.
Wow. So I believe that God has a redemptive purpose in bringing us together.
Yeah.
And I also believe that we're a generation. A generation is all the people alive at a given moment. We're a generation where the hearts of fathers, hearts of sons are turning toward one another. And when they do, race is, it's not something that we deny, but it's not something that becomes the determining factor of our relationship.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had, that's been a question, a conversation that's come up is, can a white man actually father a black spiritual son?
Yeah, sure it is.
I laugh because of it is pretty comical from that understanding. Galatians 3, and he literally, just goes down the list of these different classifications and groupings that we have in society of gender and of social status and slave or free and of, your positioning in relation to the king, where he even talks and says, you Gentiles were without hope,
Right.
far removed from the commonwealth of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And how it's so interesting how, and I think this is probably a good talking point, is why when it comes to the issue of racism, what is bumping up with the issue of racism against, the messaging of the kingdom that causes people to go, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I don't know
Yeah.
if it actually really works this way. And I say that because it's a real thing.
Yeah, it's
it
real.
happens.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's still a fear of where's this going to lead.
Right.
I see where it is. They might even say, well, I don't know. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with where it's at, but where's that going?
Yeah.
Where's that going to be, Kirk? Where are you going to end up here? You're going to end up serving a white man? Is that
Right.
you see what I mean?
Yeah.
What do you do? Is you bringing him on his plantation?
Mm-hmm.
And you see, I'm saying those words because I know those are things going on in people's hearts.
Right.
Is that from them? Is that still a stronghold that the enemy has embedded? We understand strongholds to be spiritual things where the enemy captures your thoughts, and something Paul calls it a high thing raises up against what God knows. Right. We know what God knows, but it rises up against that, and then you begin to have thoughts that are not from Christ, are not captivated by Christ, and then those lead to you jump to the wrong conclusions.
Right.
And so, I'm certain that that's an aspect of it. I've heard preachers preaching about, churches that are racial. In other words, black churches, white churches, certain churches. I think kingdom ministries based on language makes sense. In other words, if you don't even understand what's going on,
Right.
you want to go someplace where they speak speak Spanish,
Right.
or speak German or speak Korean, because that's not a racial situation. But if our language is the same and we understand one another, then what I'm saying is I've heard people who say, this is a black church, this is a white church.
Right.
Or even people say, what are you doing over there, that white man's ministry? The way it's characterized is divisive, when that's not kingdom.
Yeah.
It's completely unnecessary. And
it's
so,
actually telling and revealing of the racist issues of the heart.
yes.
To me,
yeah.
I would say that's real racism. If someone
Yeah.
would say to me, you're not going to get anything, or that white spiritual father can't produce what God wants you to produce in your life, you submitting to him, to his father, and to his leadership, is it going to produce a level of blackness that is relevant and needed for you to complete your calling? That's what a ludicrous thought. That's so ridiculous.
Oh, I see, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, talk about that.
Are they going to
more.
be
Yeah.
able to embrace, your blackness enough and your understanding?
Yeah.
And the thing is, even with this conversation, and there's a lot of conversations happening, and people are saying, well, I want to listen to be educated. I want to listen to understand.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is I listen because I love this man. And this is the assigned leader that God has given me. So it doesn't become a matter of race. It becomes a matter of, am I willing to be obedient to the king?
God, it's
But
absolutely
also,
right.
do I trust? And I think that's the thing that a lot of black people come up against. is, do we actually trust God to get me what I need,
Yeah.
put it in a white man for me? And I think the reality that we need to wrestle with and grapple with and, deal with is, yes, that's possible. I'm a product of the product.
Yeah.
First and foremost, but that is something that actually does happen.
That's right.
And if we're not careful, and this is something that I really want to say and be direct with, is if we're not careful, the very people that we're disqualifying are going to be the people that God has put something in. It's not going to, what he wants and what he's intended isn't going to arrive at the target because of a failure to receive them, a failure to receive the one that God sent.
Right.
And I believe, and this is something that I really do believe, is that it's going to be a very similar situation of what Jesus went through. And it says that they killed them because of their envy.
Mm-hmm.
Envy being a motivating factor that causes us to demonize or to exclude or to silence whoever's mouths that's actually preaching the gospel of the kingdom. And I think we really do need to be careful of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a father of fathers, and you're a father. You're an emerging spiritual father. You will have natural children, and they're going to face whatever cultural context is available to them. But as a spiritual father, Kirk, you are going to father white spiritual children, Latino, Black. Race is going to have much less of a context in terms of a defining of relationship, I believe, for you, because of what we're doing together is going to tear down some things,
Correct.
open up some things, make things available. In your spiritual fathering, you will understand how to father white spiritual children in the same way that I've understood you, because I understand you by the Spirit. I understand you by destiny. When I look at you and I look at you in your eyes, I see what's in your belly. What I see in your belly is spiritual, and I see treasures of spiritual inheritance that came through the DNA, through the bloodlines, and when I see them, I see kingdom. And so outward appearance to me, well, you're a handsome young man.
I appreciate that.
And you're a very intelligent young man. I have deep respect for you. I never have any words about Kirk that are not deeply respectful. And I find myself talking about you, bragging about you as a spiritual son when I'm talking to other people. And when I do so, I don't think about skin color.
Right.
I
don't either.
In terms of culture, I'm sure that you have some cultural aspects. When the superhero movie came out, what do you call that? I'm sorry. There was a hero movie about black, that was all the people in it basically were black.
Black Panther.
Yeah, Black Panther. There we go. And you guys celebrated it, and you went to the theater and watched it, and I did too. I watched it myself and enjoyed it, but I didn't see anything particularly racial about it. I mean, I don't know if I'm just naive or what, but I didn't see that. I thought, this is great. Why not?
Yeah.
There may have been some overtones, kind of like, finally the black super people are here to save the world. And I thought, well, hey, we've been saying Superman was going to save the world for a long time. That was just, that's just as fictional as the other. In other words, I just thought it's great art. It's great communication. It was beautiful, everything about it.
Right. I think the undertones are what's important.
Yeah.
What you're saying is,
yeah.
And I do believe, I would say that maybe a greater level, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, maybe a greater level of accountability or response to those things is needed in the kingdom. Because, with that situation with Black Panther, from your perspective, it's like, yeah, of course black people can produce something of great quality, especially in the arts and entertainment industry.
Absolutely.
With a movie.
And should.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then they do. But for a lot of people, it's overcoming, and I think that's and I would say that I think that's the inner working for me being black is this actually really possible?
Yeah.
And then it does happen, and then it's, okay, so what's going to affirm what I already, thought to be true has to be the response of other people that are outside my culture.
Oh, okay.
And I think this validation that comes in from the outside to validate what we did, do I think it's important and should it be celebrated? Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I thought it was a great movie. I love the movie.
I agree.
But I also don't come at it from a perspective of, okay, this movie, what's riding on this is that black people have to prove that they can produce a great superhero movie.
Exactly. That's beautiful. I think that's extreme wisdom and great insight, because there isn't either or. There's not us and them. There's this.
Right.
And fantastically produced, great timing, great sequence,
Great music.
good. Yeah,
I love the music.
yeah. The music was great, and it has endurance.
Yeah.
You can watch it more than once.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything about it was high quality, and I celebrated it, but I didn't see it as a statement
Right.
about, either or, us and them. I saw that as something that should have been available to history for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you spend all your time making westerns in which there weren't that many black people involved, then you didn't have black heroes.
Right.
Like Gone with the Wind, I thought the black people who acted in that were great actors, actresses. They did great. They did their parts well.
Right.
That's what they were called upon to do, and then they were celebrated for doing so.
Right.
And
They just canceled that movie though.
yeah, whether or not it depicts actual history, well, obviously no. I mean, there's a whole bunch of history that's not available because it's not a part of the script. It's not a part of the story itself. It was about something Gone with the Wind, about antediluvian life, and perhaps it should have been Gone with the Wind, or perhaps it shouldn't. That's a discussion point. But you misinterpret art, you misinterpret the message if you're not careful about intentions and the moment in history. So when I watched Gone with the Wind, I never thought it was demeaning.
Yeah.
I mean, I had enough horror in my heart already about slavery.
Right.
I have enough horror there, enough hatred of slavery.
Right.
There's never been a moment in my life when I felt that was the right thing. And that's something all of my family and ancestors fought. We were a part of fighting it.
Yeah.
And spiritually, that's my heritage. My family is Wesleyan, and I was just reading. John Wesley wrote a little booklet on slavery. The title was On Slavery, which goes back even further than 1619, as the New York Times discussion, and talks about slavery, where it came from, and why it became something that rose up again in history, which diminished in history, then it came back in history, and then flooded the Americas. So the Americas became a part of that, and then he talks about why he thinks that happened. Different perspective, of course, because it was completely spiritual. His discussion of it has to do with the spiritual aspects, which is where I am coming from now. The spiritual solution
Exactly.
only comes from Jesus Christ. If anything but the cross could have fixed this problem, then Jesus would not have had to die. He died because only the cross can fix this problem. So the implementation of redemption, where does redemption come? We talk about reconciliation, which in the New Testament means the word atonement. Reconciliation means God atoned at one-ment. He brought things back together with opportunity. What are we going to do with this opportunity? What are we going to do to apply the power of the cross to the situation in which we now live? And as kingdom people, we have to separate that out as to, here's some sinful behaviors.
Right.
They're not the solution. In other words, if we have an injustice, more injustice won't fix that. As Paul said, if you have a sin problem, more sin doesn't release more grace. What grace does is come to give you the capability of stop that behavior.
Right.
And this is what we need to see. But to say we're going to fix our society, we're never going to have a repeat of this moment, it's not going to happen because we still have sinful people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're doing in the kingdom is we're raising the influence of the power of Jesus of Nazareth. We're increasing his influence on the culture in order to raise the entire culture into kingdom culture.
Right.
And that's the way you preach, that's the way you dance, it's the way you worship, so it's the way you pray, it's the way you prophesy. It is who you are.
Yeah.
You have that fabric woven into you with it has greater power than any other motivational factor in your life. That anointing brings all of the blood flow of your ancestors and that DNA into something of kingdom right now, and that makes your voice available to the United States and to other nations, because you will be preaching and have in other nations. You prophesied in other nations. And when you did, there was something of the royal bloodline, of the kingdom bloodline of the purposes of nations from which your ancestors came, that spoke in any nation and every nation. Where's racism in that? It disappears.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah, it disappears, exactly. And that's the power and the beauty of it.
Yeah.
The reality of where we are now is really stunning. Something's happened that's never happened before. There's an aspect of it that's like a storm that we can't sustain. But what triggered the moment we're in now, this horrendous activity that killed George Floyd, we need to return to that and make sure that opportunity, that door didn't close without us bringing us into the next level, the next step. So I know that your voice and other voices like it need to continue to speak into that. Let's not move on and say, well, we'll just put that in the hands of the system. The system already failed. I mean, we didn't have an immediate murder charge. I was shocked at the way the death of George Floyd was, the response I thought was totally inadequate.
Yeah.
I was like, what am I missing here? Then now we've got all kinds of surrounding odd theories and things going on, but, that's an undeniable moment.
Right.
That we need to go back to that moment and say, we do not have resolution of this. We still do not have a constitutional, we don't have a kingdom response, we don't have a constitutional response. This thing shouldn't take another 2 years.
Right.
It should be something more immediate, and that's what our Constitution calls for.
Exactly.
So, I really think we don't want to miss this opportunity, the moment. We want to recognize it as kingdom leaders and speak into it. Otherwise, then our dialogue continues on a one-to-one basis. But as kingdom leaders, and you're a kingdom leader, your voice needs to have broader communication, broader influence because of the prophetic that you carry and your perspective, which on this time of discussion already has just blown my mind. Okay, you've not answered questions. You've opened doors now that I need to go into rooms I didn't know exist and think through what you've shared here, and even my understanding of you as a person is greater. So back to the subject as we're kind of finishing up here, because we're in an episode of video here I want to share with people. What do you think, if in the context of, let's go back to George Floyd and what needs to be done, speak into that as a young, emerging, prophetic voice in your generation. What do you think needs to be done about that? How do you feel about the response as it is right now?
The response of
of anybody, yeah. Anything.
I think that there's been a delay. Definitely. It's kind of a no-brainer situation. I think that's how a lot of people feel about it. And so just the answer needs to come down. The justice needs to be released. Whatever's holding it up. I would say that I don't see any reason why there should be a delay. And I think that's the outcry is with this level of a horrendous act, why would there be any delay?
Right.
The sad thing is with everything else that's happening that's surrounding the issue, again, to your point, we do kind of forget about that. And we do need to return back to that point and press for that matter is let's get justice on this matter.
Right.
I think that's going to be really telling of where our justice system and where a lot of things are at. And what we actually do need to solve is when that verdict does come down.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that we could change the hearts of individuals that we come in contact with. Exactly what's happening right here, right now is important. But on that specific matter, we just need justice to come. There shouldn't be any holdup. We should be praying for justice. Any delays to be broken in the spirit, any limitations, anything that's hindering or holding that up, that needs to be dealt with.
Well, as a spiritual father who we've lived together, talked through a lot of things, hardly any subjects that we haven't walked through together in 10 years.
That's true.
Have you seen racism in me?
No, that's never even been that hasn't even been how do I want to put this? That hasn't been an accusation or anything that's risen up from the inside of me. Now, I will say that the enemy will come to harass and to project that. However, you've never exhibited any, racist remarks or said anything racist that would lead me to believe. I do, Dr. Don is a racist leader. So there's no racism, there's no trace, there's no case or anything that could stand up against the reality of how you father different people from different cultures, different races, which I know the media is saying that, you would just think there's black and white people. We do have Hispanics here in our ministry.
Yeah.
Even Puerto Ricans.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That there has not been
They're
a
unique.
difference in fathering
Yeah.
in how you lead a kingdom center in general. I mean, and I've said this openly, there's actually more black leaders. I mean, you could look at our prophetic council. There's actually more black leaders in our prophetic council than any other any other race, if you want to look at it in that terms.
Yeah.
But no, not at all.
I don't think about that, but you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, even with that, I didn't like, wow, we're going to show everybody that we're not racist by having more black people.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? There's no calculation in it. It's just you're a prophet, so prophesy.
Right.
Yeah, you're a woman. Prophesy. It doesn't matter. And we have leaders. Haiti is their background. Puerto Rico is their background. But Puerto Rico as via New York is their background. Yeah. So which means there's some variations on the theme, as it were, of racism. But so in other words, what I'm saying to you is, I've never diminished you. I've never said you needed to earn it, because I never said. I just said, this is who you are.
Right.
This is what you need to do. I haven't changed the way I corrected you because of that. But I would imagine, I guess I'm surprised, because I would suspect that I would have something of racial residue in me somewhere, not even realizing it sometimes. Comments I make. What I do is, if I don't understand something that I think's of black culture, I just go and ask. It's like, explain this to me. I'm not sure I understand what that statement means. And I always get really great answers. So you can know, my last name's Lynch. That's not a good last name. I've had so many people on Facebook post me. Social media is like, your name's Lynch and you want to talk about racism? And it's like, well, yeah, my ancestors, that's where I got the name. They lynched people. They lynched people, yeah. Right. That's where the name comes from. Yeah. It's actually, it came from my ancestors, but they weren't lynching black people. They were lynching white people first, but then lynching became a thing, which, listen, lynching is not justice.
Right.
So I have this name. Of course, it came from Europe and Scotch Irish. It came from Ireland, and it was probably Lynch or something like that originally, and then became Lynch. Came over to the Americas. But it is true that the behavior of some of my ancestors, or wherever the name came from, it started in Virginia. Right. Was just a form of justice, which was not justice. So I do kind of, step right into the situation and say my name, and I prophesy injustice. But I don't sense that I have it. But if I do, I know that means there's something in my spirit that needs to be cleansed. Is what I'm saying. There's something in my spirit that I could make a comment. I would say something, and my spirit not recognize that as being wicked. Means I'd have a blind spot. And I just want you to know, and I'm saying it, but that all of us are capable of having a blind spot.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so if I had a blind spot, what I do, I make myself accountable. I'm completely, it's like, Dr. Don, let me explain to you that what you just said sounds racist to me, or I discern that you have a residue. I'm so open to that people need to understand it, that I'm just open to that. I don't want that in my life because of the spiritual aspects.
Correct.
The other side of it is that I'm just, almost fearless, almost to the point of stupid about talking about things that people are like, you'd be better off if you didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Because I have seen racism in 30 different nations.
Yeah.
And I understand racism from the Jewish point of view, by observation, not that I'm Jewish, but you know, that kind of racism is even more ancient than any other.
Correct.
And there's some
Yep.
people understand that nearly all racism goes back to the fact God chose a particular people.
Right.
So,
And I think that's where the trust level comes in is you chose this particular group and I wasn't in that group. So can I really submit my life to you? Can I really trust you? And I think that's part of the work of the enemy to cause this racism thing to be an exclusion to everything else that's happening in the kingdom. It's, you know, we can talk about everything else and prophesying and preaching and intercession and all these great things, but when it comes to this issue, you can't talk about it.
yeah,
You know.
that's be good for us to sit down again and talk about why did God have separate cultures? Why does he have nations, which he does want, Deuteronomy tells us. And then he said, but I did choose this one to be a remnant nation, and I put into that what I wanted other nations to be.
Yeah.
He didn't say, I want everybody to become Jewish.
Right.
He said, other nations will look at your culture and say, who's your God? Because we need him to be our God. Who gave you all these principles that make your economy work, your families work? Your culture is powerful. How can we bring your culture into our culture? But when they, you know, God at no time said that he wanted to destroy all the cultures. He wanted to redeem all of them.
Correct.
That plan didn't work because his remnant failed.
Right.
Let's not fail.
Is that yeah.
Okay? We're the remnant now.
Yeah.
The remnant is the spiritual kingdom that Jesus established. Let's get it right and let's expand it.
Amen.
I love you, son.
Love you too.